And keeping in this theme, staying in this theme of the American cowboy and how it was really started by Mexican American cowboys who got it from the Mexican cowboys. And then those cowboys got it from the Spanish cowboys, and the Spanish cowboys got it from the Arabian cowboys, and the Arabian cowboys got it from the Mongols and all of those people from up in the steppes, like the like the mix of Caucasoid people and which, by the way, does not mean white. It just means people from a certain region, close to Russia, and in the middle of it's just in between all of these other cultures. Like it's in between Russia, Asia. But anyways, I don't want to get into it. But the point is, it's very diverse, man, and the since it's in the middle of like a lot of religions. I mean, a lot of countries, a lot of different cultures. It has a lot of religions. It has Buddhism. It has Muslims. It has Christians. It's like a mixed bag of different things and cultures, and there's Asians, white people. There's But anyways, I got you see that's what I'm talking about. That's the ADHD with that shit where I'm talking about one thing and then I just go off. But my point is, the main reason I want to say that and I want to talk about where everything came from is because I think it's very important to understand that everyone gets it from somewhere. And of course, everyone puts their own spin on it. In my personal opinion, the Mexican spin on the cowboy is probably the main one that inspired the world. If we're gonna be honest, it wasn't the Arabian cowboy because the Arabian farmer or the how they say it in Spanish, ganadero or farmer. Really, that's what it is. It's just is a farmer. It's a guy who knows about domesticating animals. And that's really what they're doing. They're domesticating a horse. They're domesticating um, you know, just different types of animals, cows, dogs. They have herding dogs and stuff like that. So it's an ability that was developed by necessity. So and it's ability that goes way back, all the way to the people that come from like the steppes. And that's a whole other story. But basically, it came off of necessity, and it came off of really loneliness if you think about it. Because if you're up there where it's colder, there's not that much food, right? You're gonna have to drink out of a cow, out of a goat milk. And so you got to domesticate these creatures in order for you to even get close to them and start like milking the cow. You get what I'm saying? So, and the same thing was happened with riding the horses. We needed to figure out a way to hunt, and we started riding horses, plain and simple. And so, if we're gonna talk about an originator of these things, it would have to be, in my opinion, the people of the steppes that began to domesticate animals. And domestication is a lot of people say, oh, it's tough and you got to be rough. And first of all, you gotta have a lack of fear of animals. You have to be very, like they say, macho. Like I've worked in farms before, and you can't be scared of a bull. You cannot be scared of a bull because I don't know what it is about it. If you're not confident, if you don't how you say, if you don't present yourself to a larger animal like that, authoritative and like with some type of confidence, I don't know how to explain it, that animal is gonna come at you. and it's bigger than you. The thing is, it doesn't. They don't really have like a size in their brains. They don't really think about size. They just think this guy's in front of me, or sometimes they don't even see you, and they're just running. Especially like if the cows they get excited or whatever, they start running together, and somebody tells you got to stand right here and make them go that way. You know, if you're not confident, they're not. They're gonna run all over you, dude, and you're probably gonna die because those things are heavy as fuck. You know, so and that's how you get like in a farm. That's how you get kids to get some balls, really, is by telling them to stand in front of these freaking cows and scaring them off to a direction where you want them to go. And that's the thing, bro. You gotta be loud, bro. You gotta be and then it feels kind of cool though once you do it. And you're like, damn, I can't believe like a stampede of cows almost ran me over, and I just got big and extended my arms and I screamed really loud, and they moved the other way. So, and by the way, there's dogs that their whole jobs is to do that. It's to scare cows and goats and sheep into corrals and shit. So the amount of balls, because they weigh less than some of us, some of us, and the cows weigh way more than us. And just think about that, bro. Just think about the balls you gotta have to scare like a bunch of these fucking animals that are bigger than you. It's crazy. But anyways, that just goes to show that the abilities that these cowboys would have were very needed, and so the reason I talk about this, right, and I'll repeat it again, is that everything comes from somewhere, and Mexican culture is a mixture of Spanish culture and Indian culture or Native American culture from Mexico, and Spanish culture was diverse too. It wasn't just white people, because a lot of people want to say like Spanish people were just European whites, but the thing is, Europe is not just white people. I know it's hard for people to understand this, and they just think like, oh, Europe is where white people come from. That's not the case. In fact, Europe for a long time, the demographics of Europe changed over the years a bunch of times. All right, so sometimes it was brown, sometimes it was black, sometimes it was white. At the moment it's predominantly white. But it's just gonna switch back. It's just the way of the world, bro. Demographics change, and they go from one to the other, and they fluctuate. And I know a lot of people that are in their own heads about, oh, the demographics are changing. That's what happens, bro. That's just what happens. That's the way of nature. At one point in time, the New World, which is no longer new, right? This side of the world, which is the Americas, was full of brown people. It was nothing but brown people. And then what happened? One white guy landed on the shores and spread a disease, and then like more than half died. Of course, I'm exaggerating. It was more than one, but I just imagine just one white guy just stepping on the shores and just being like, "Hey guys," and then everybody just starts falling and dying. Which is not how it happened, but it's just like a funny thought that I had. But that's why a lot of the natives died. It was because of diseases, bro. It wasn't because they were smaller, or they had the white people had better technology, bro. A lot of white people died, bro, trying to come over here and colonize, because the governments of Europe weren't supporting them. They weren't giving them weapons. They weren't doing nothing. And even when they did, a lot of them failed. A lot of them disappeared. A lot of them, a lot of Vikings came over, and they disappeared and they died. So it wasn't like an easy thing. It wasn't like an overnight thing that white people just landed on the shores of Mexico and they took over immediately. No, it was they landed, they got defeated a couple of times, they lost a lot of men in the process. Now the stories, they're gonna be written by the people that won, so they're not gonna be telling you, oh, we got humiliated by people with Stone Age weapons. But where you're gonna see what really happened is what happens to some of the allies of the Spanish, like the Tlaxcalans. We look at the Tlaxcalans. A lot of them were promoted. A lot of them were knighted. A lot of them um, were put into the ranks of the Spanish, and they used them to go conquer other nations. So just think about that. Why would you take these warriors if they're not that good? Why would you bring them along to conquer Peru, to go to Peru, to go to Argentina, to go to the Philippines? Why would you pin them up against samurais and shit like that? Like, think about that. Because there's actually a story of Tlaxcalans facing off against, well, not necessarily samurais, but like ex samurais. Like what do you call those? Uh, People that used to be samurais, but then they quit, and then or they were dishonored or something like that. They were pirates, basically. Um, and so what I'm trying to say is like you could also see the influence of. This is my opinion, of course. It hasn't been historically proven, but in my opinion, you could see the influence of Mexican fighting, like Native Mexican fighting styles, being adopted by the Spanish and being adopted by the Filipinos. Okay, and the thing is, the Mexicans, even though they were stripped of their martial arts, and they were stripped of a lot of the codexes that they wrote down, a lot of the secrets that they wrote down were burnt down, right? They had a fighting style, right? And you could see it in some of the accounts that the Spanish were talking about, to where they said that one of these guys could take down horses, or one of these guys could fight off a platoon of Spanish fighters. Okay, just start thinking about it. Not only that, some of these Native Americans were giants, bro. Some of these Mexican um, warriors, they weren't regular stature. Okay, so there's legends, dude. Like, even some of the Spanish would say, "Hey, man, some of these some of these natives here from Mexico, they're big, they're huge." All right, and there's a legend of another Tlaxcalan warrior who he was big. He was a huge guy. He was like 7 something feet tall or something like that. I forgot how tall he is, but he was way taller than the rest of the people there. So when people say, "Oh, the white people were taller," or whatever, white people in general, or the Spanish that would come over, they were normal size, bro. Okay, which is like 5'9" and up, 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet tall. That's about the normal range. Anything above, in my opinion, anything above 6 feet tall, that's when you're above average height, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion. And you guys could agree or disagree. That's just my personal opinion. But anything below that is short. But as I was saying, yes, you guys got to read the accounts. Don't just look at history from one side. Look at history from both sides, and from people that don't even have anything to do with it. But what I will say is this: if you look at what the Spanish started doing when it comes to dueling, and when it comes to their forms of fighting after they met the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans. By the way, the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans were brothers. They were like from the same tribe. They just separated because of differences of how to rule. And but they became sworn enemies after that. That's why they joined the Spanish against the Aztecs. But anyways, if you look at the martial arts and the way it changed, the Spanish martial arts and the way it changed after they met the Mesoamerican warriors, the Aztecs and the Tlaxcalans, you'll realize that the differences and the things that they started doing, they're very how can I say this? They're very similar to some of the things that you would see in some of the codexes or some of the Spanish accounts. Um, after that, they went and tried to take over the Philippines, and then the Philippines developed their own martial arts. And I'm not saying that actually that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that the Mexican warriors that they faced off more than likely influenced a lot of the Spanish, a lot of the Filipino martial arts that they developed in those days. Because before that, they didn't really have a martial arts. The martial arts, well, they did, but it was influenced by Spanish um, fighting styles, and like if you look at some of the things that you would see and I know I'm deviating a little bit because I've been talking about martial arts for a while, but if you look at some of the things the accounts that they say, the Spanish would say about the Aztecs, and some of the Tlaxcalans as well, is that they could disarm you, or they could dismount somebody from a horse, and even if it was running at full speed or whatever, they could turn the lance against their opponents easily. Now, if you look at something like that, what does that sound like to you? That sounds like they developed the martial arts to where even if they don't have a weapon in their hands, they're able to disarm the opponent and turn their weapon against the attacker. That means that they had a system that allowed them to do these things and allowed them to use weapons in a way that was very good. That was very, almost Eskrima like. Then you start looking at some of these accounts of how these guys were so good that they would develop. If there was a great warrior, they would develop a way for a lot of people to attack them with clubs, with sharpened clubs, and then they would give the prisoner a feather club, right? Because their skill was so good that they were that good that they could beat these guys with sharpened clubs with a stick. Just think about that, bro. Like their ability must have been like crazy to be able to fight off, and of course they would die in the end, most of them, and but the ability for them to fight, was crazy, in my personal opinion. But anyways, that's just to say that everybody influences everybody. Everybody, develops a martial arts or a skill or even an art form that comes from various different cultures. And the same thing goes for something like the blues, which in my opinion is one of these things that people say it's only that it was developed just by black people, and I'm not like attacking the blues. I love the blues, and yes, it is mainly a black developed thing, but the truth is that it was influenced by Asian guitar playing, Spanish or Mexican guitar playing, and country like the banjo and stuff like that. That the mixture of all of those things together was what made the blues, and they developed their own way of playing. Of course, it's their own unique way of playing. But I, as a guy who loves music and who loves different cultures, I could hear the Asian. Like I could hear the Asian influences in there. I could hear the Spanish influences, especially like when it comes to the Spanish influences, is more like in the soloing and in the way they organize their music. It's very Spanish, very Mexican like. Especially like you listen to norteño music and you listen to like some of the sad music like Tragos de Amargo Licor. Like I don't know if you listen to that song. Now that style of music is very old, right? But the way they sing these types of songs to where it's like sad, right? And they put in their emotions in there, and they know how to do it and organize the music in a way that it sounds like the guitar's crying almost, or the guitar is repeating what you're saying. That was done by Spanish and Mexican people for a long time, for a very long time, and that's just my opinion, guys. Now, if this that's my opinion because I know that no culture just sprungs up out of nothing. Everybody influences everybody. And like I said, Mexicans didn't invent cowboys. They just invented the cowboys that everybody loves. That's just it. They invented the cowboy that we know and that comes out on TV all the time. That was invented by Chicano or Mexican American Western people. Okay, um, Figo Baca. I don't know if you guys know about that guy. So that the other thing is like there, like I said, there's a lot of hate, and this is my opinion, in certain communities for the fact that the Mexican cowboy was actually a thing. Okay, and how do I know this? Is because the way the Mexican is portrayed in a lot of these Western movies is not they're not really portrayed in a good light. Okay, and you always see like you always see like um it's two things. They either whitewash a Mexican American hero that existed at one time, um, or they make them look like these like really like bad people. For a long time, every time I would watch westerns, the white guy was always the hero. The white guy was always the fastest or the most dangerous shooters, and the Mexicans were usually these like greasy, dirty, scheming, ugly looking guys. Usually banditos. For some reason, we're always the bandito, and that's pretty much how the Mexican was portrayed, right? And that always kind of bothered me, but at the same time, I was like, I guess I really didn't care at the time. I was a kid, and but I remember the two times that it did bother me was when I was older, and I had like more reasoning and stuff. And one of the times it wasn't that bad. It was in the movie Tombstone. In the beginning of the movie, I believe that a bunch of American cowboys cross into Mexico, and they go into a little town and they start messing with the people, and they start like bullying everybody, and nobody could really do anything about it because these guys were too fast, I guess. But just the whole thing was kind of weird to me. It was like, damn, like that's kind of crazy, right? It was kind of weird to me, but I didn't really think much of it. But at the same time, I was like, man, that's kind of like hateful in a way. I could feel the hate for some reason. But then there was this other one that really got to me, and this was actually a spaghetti western, which was even more crazy to me because what do Italians care? Why do they care? Anyways, because by the way, a lot of the Mexicans in the spaghetti westerns weren't really Mexicans; they were Italians, which just goes to show you how not all white people are created equal, or not all white people look the way you think they would look. Um, but anyways, and by the way, some of the Spanish that came over and conquered Europe, they were mixed with Arabs, so a lot of them looked Mexican, even before they mixed, in with the natives. But anyways, um, and I remember this spaghetti western, and I remember that there was this guy. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, white guy. It's not this movie here. This is just an example of how they whitewashed Murrieta. But anyways, uh, and this guy says to the Mex, because he goes in and he's helping these Mexicans learn how to fight, because supposedly they don't know how to fight, and they have to fight against some army or something like that. I think it's the Mexican army or something. I forgot. And because it was a long time ago, but I definitely remember the speech that he gave him. And he says to the Mexicans, he's like, he's like giving a speech to them. He's like, if you want me to make you famous, I'll make you famous. I'll make you like Pancho Villa. I'll make you like Zapata, and I made those guys famous, and I can make you famous too. And I'll give you the credit for my kills or whatever. He was telling that to the Mexicans, like that he was gonna give them credit for his kills, and he was kind of like the man with no name or something like that. He was trying to come off as that, and because spaghetti westerns, they really like that kind of stuff. And then I started thinking, I was like, that's a very specific thing to say. That's a very specific thing to say, actually. And he kind of got me to thinking, a lot of these people that write history, they change history. And they make it seem like they're the ones that are doing all that stuff, and they kind of switch around. But the thing is, they can't help themselves. And they kind of at the same time tell on themselves by projecting these things. And I think, and I know it's just a movie, but I think the opposite is true. And I was actually looking through history, and I think it is true. Like, I figured out there was a guy called Figo or Fuego Vaca, something like that. He was a Mexican American that lived in like California, I think, or something like that. And he was attacked by I don't know how many Texas Rangers, right? A bunch. And he was in his house, and he fought them off, all of them, and he became famous for fighting off a bunch of Texas Rangers. And by the way, all the Texas Rangers were arrested because they were out of their jurisdiction, and so they were arrested and sent back home. But Figo Vaca became famous for that, and he's one of the most famous people in the West. Figo Vaca, go look him up. And he's not the only one. He's not the only Mexican American or Mexican. And by the way, Mexicans have always had trouble trying to fit into American culture. And a lot of them were like prosecuted and forced to leave the country and join Mexico, pretty much, because they were hated so much over here. And the reason for that, and the reason a lot of them became banditos and became rebels, was because the people were being treated like shit in the U.S. by, the authority figures. People that wanted their land would go get a badge, come shoot them, and then the land is theirs. That's basically what would happen all throughout the West, all throughout the South. Like Texas and stuff like that. And so a lot of these people, a lot of these Mexicans, / Americans, because they were here before, they didn't like that. They didn't like that a white person could just pick up a badge or get a permit from the government and then come and take land that was there before them. And so they would rise up and they would, kill people and get their land back. And they would call these people banditos. That's really what it was. The thing about it is that a lot of these guys that were rebels, they were freaking badass. Like, they were fast, they were hard to catch because they knew the land better than the people that were coming in. They knew how to hide in the mountains. It was hard. They were just really hard to catch, these guys. And You know, and that's where the legend of Murrieta comes from. He's one of these guys that stood up to the powers that be, and he was hard to catch because a lot of the women were helping him out. That's where you get the whole Zorro thing, um, and stuff like that. So the opposite was true, guys. Most of these guys from the old west were actually Mexican. A lot of the things that you see other pistoleros get credit for was actually done by Mexican um, by Mexican shooters. You know that's the truth, and the credit was given usually to a white man because there would be one guy in the crew that was Mexican, and usually that was the guy that was doing the killing. Okay, that's what I'm thinking because it happened once. I think Billy the Kid, or yeah, Billy the Kid was killed by a Mexican, and they put it in the papers that it was his boss that did it. And of course, they're gonna give him the credit because they're not gonna give the credit to the Mexican that's in his crew. You know what I mean? They're not gonna do that. Yeah, I forgot his name because he has a very weird name. I forgot his name, but it's a very weird Mexican name. He shot Billy the Kid. Okay, and then when that happened, they didn't people didn't want to accept it, and they were like, nah, he's actually still alive, and he went to Mexico or whatever. Well, he got shot in Mexico. He got shot by a Mexican. Uh, it's what happened, dude. What do you want me to do? And that's a lot of the stories end up like a lot of these outlaws were actually some of them were caught by Mexicans. I'm sorry to say it, bro. It's the truth. That's why. That's why they try to silence the whole thing because it's like, damn, like. But at the same time, they can't really silence the whole thing, and they have to put like certain heroes that represent Mexican Americans or Mexicans, which is Zorro. Zorro is pretty much inspired by Murrieta, and Murrieta, I mean Zorro inspired all these other superheroes that came after him, including Batman. That's right, Batman. Batman's Mexican, bro. What do you want me to do? You want me to lie to you? You want me to lie to you? I mean, at this point, he's working construction. He's damn near doing landscaping now. I think he took out Poison Ivy with a bunch of chainsaws hooked to his wrists. What do you want me to do? You want me to lie? You want me to lie to you? You want me to lie to you? So you can keep on living a lie? No, I gotta tell you the truth, bro. That's what I'm here for. Even though it's uncomfortable, even though it makes you damn all my legends. You remember the man with no name? You remember Clint Eastwood? You notice how he was wearing a sarape, which is a Mexican clothing item. Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they gave you that symbolism for what? And why is his name the man with no name? Because they don't want to name the fucking Mexicans, bro. That's why they want to keep them in the dark. But they know, and they're giving us like little signs, like, yeah, we know, but we're not gonna like. Just give them a sarape. Give them a sarape, just so they'll know. So but don't tell them that that's who it was. Like Garcia, we're not gonna give Garcia the credit. You know what I mean? But anyways, it is what it is. What are you gonna do? If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.